strikes and other attacks on November 4th. So Israel patiently waited until November 4th, 2008. Who remembers what happened on November 4th, 2008? I'll give you a clue. It has nothing to do with Britney Spears or Paris Hilton. Anybody know? Yes, it was a historic election in the United States. The public's attention, the media's attention, was riveted to the result of the election. And on that day, Israel chose to invade Gaza, kill 6 Palestinian militants, knowing full well that it would evoke Hamas rocket and mortar attacks, which was exactly what they wanted. They needed an excuse to attack Gaza, a long-planned invasion, and they provoked the mortar and rocket attacks on our election day. But Hamas, you know, these Islamicists, these fanatics, they were very stubborn. And they kept saying till the end of December, we're willing to renew the ceasefire. We're ready to renew the ceasefire. But Israel has to abide by the terms. It has to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza. The blockade, which is a flagrant violation of international law, a possible crime against humanity. The blockade, which was destroying a civilization. Israel said no. Israel said Hamas had to stop its rocket and mortar attacks, but it, meaning Israel, would not lift the blockade of Gaza. By the end of December 2008, Sarah Roy, the world's leading authority in Gaza's economy, she's at Harvard University. She also personally happens to be the daughter of a survivor of Auschwitz concentration camp. Sarah Roy wrote, referring to Gaza, she said, the breakdown of an entire society is happening in front of us, but there is little international response beyond UN warnings which are ignored. And now the people of Gaza, Hamas, they were confronted with 2 stark options. One option was to gradually succumb, to acquiesce in their asphyxiation. And the other option was to resist. Hamas opted, it chose for resistance, even though the resistance was largely symbolic. Even as a former Israeli military commander, or the former Israeli military commander in Gaza, he said at this time, speaking not to Gazans, not to the world, but speaking to other Israelis, he said, you cannot just land blows, leave the Palestinians in Gaza in economic distress, and expect that Hamas will just sit around and do nothing. It's easy enough to condemn Hamas to the rocket and mortar attacks on Israel, and all the human rights organizations did so. But if you attack Hamas on those grounds, then you still have an obligation to show what else could they have done. Otherwise, if you attack them for the rocket and mortar attacks, but don't tell them what their other option was, you're in effect saying that the people of Gaza had a legal and moral obligation to just lie still and die. In any event, Israel decided to expedite the process, and on December 27th, Israel invaded Gaza. The invasion lasted about 22 days, the 22 days of what Amnesty International called the 22 days of death and destruction. Now there is a question, what did happen in Gaza? Nowadays, the media, Israel, even reputable human rights organizations, they refer to the war in Gaza. There was a war in Gaza. Israel says, well, there was a lot of death, there was a lot of destruction. We all know that death and destruction, they're part and parcel of a war. And in fact, Israel was rather pleased with the outcome in Gaza, because Israel said, well, you know, those Arabs, those Muslims, they were getting too uppity. And now we've shown them who's in charge. We've shown them who's boss in this corner of the world. And how did we do that? Well, we did that by winning the war in Gaza. We won the war in Gaza. Well, along came an Israeli strategic analyst, and he said, it's very dangerous for Israel to believe it won the war in Gaza when there was no war. In reality, not a single battle was fought during those 22 days of fighting. A former Israeli foreign ministry official, he said there was no war. Hamas sat in its bunkers and came out when it was all over. Well, there was no war in Gaza. What did happen? On a military plane, it's fairly straightforward and uncontroversial. It began with what was called the air phase of the assault, the first week. By the end of the 22 days, Israel had flown about 2,800 to 3,000 combat missions over Gaza. Every plane returned, and a single plane was downed. In fact, not a single plane was even damaged, which is not too surprising, because the people of Gaza, they had no anti-aircraft defenses to speak of. After the first week, Israel launched what is called its air and ground assault on Gaza. The Israeli soldiers, they had special night fighting equipment. Hamas couldn't even see them, let alone tangle with them. Well, there were no planes down, no planes even damaged. Hamas couldn't even see the Israeli soldiers. But what did happen in Gaza? And here we actually have what a lawyer might call unimpeachable testimony, which is to say, we have the testimony of the Israeli soldiers themselves, who, after the attack on Gaza, came forward and lent personal witness to what they experienced. So, what did the soldiers have to say? Soldier, there was nothing there. Ghost towns, except for some livestock, nothing moved. Soldier, most of the time it was boring. There were not really too many events. Soldier, I did not see one single Arab the whole time we were there, that whole week. Soldier, everyone was disappointed about not engaging anyone. Soldier, usually we did not see a living soul, except for our soldiers, of course. Not a soul. Soldier, go ahead, ask the other soldiers how often they encountered combatants in Gaza. Nothing, no one. Soldier, there was supposed to be a tiny resistance force upon entry, but there just wasn't any. Well, so far it sounds kind of surreal. Some people even find it sort of funny. And it is kind of funny until you hear the second half. And for the second half, it's easy enough for you to check on your own, and you should check on your own. A veteran or a alumnus of the 1960s, and back then a lot of us used to wear this button, a black button with white letters, question authority. And I think that's a wise thing to do. There was a little Jewish boy in the 19th century named Carlos Marx, and Mr. Marx was a very smart little boy. He was also a revolutionary. And he was once asked what's the credo by which he lives, because he was a smart Jewish boy. He answered in Latin, and he answered, De omnibus dubitandum. Who knows what that means? De omnibus dubitandum. No Latin speakers here? Yeah. To doubt everything, that's correct. And so you should check for yourself. And all you have to do to check for yourself is go to your computer and under Google, enter the words breaking the silence. And if you enter those words, what will come up on your screen is a collection of testimonies from Israeli soldiers. And then all you have to do is under the search function, enter the word insane. And if you enter the word insane, it comes up once, insane, 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 4 times, 5 times, insane, insane. The soldiers were questioned separately. It's not as if they were cueing each other, but the same word kept leaping to mind. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. No enemy in the field, no foe to tangle with, but Israel's using insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. One soldier said, "This was firepower such as I had never known. There were blasts all the time. The earth was constantly shaking." Another soldier said, "On the ground you hear these thunderous blasts all day long. I mean, not just tank shelling, which was a tune we'd long gotten used to, but blasts that actually rocked the outpost, to the extent that some of us were ordered out of the house we were quartered in for fear it would collapse." The Israeli soldiers invade Gaza. They commandeer the Palestinian homes. They're firing into the horizon. But these insane amounts of firepower are such that the ground underneath them is quaking. And they're told to abandon the houses because the houses might fall on their heads. So what did happen in Gaza? Actually, the Israeli soldiers came up with the best metaphors, or the most telling metaphors. One soldier said it felt like hunting season had begun. Sometimes it reminded me of a PlayStation computer game. Another soldier said, you felt like a child playing around with a magnifying glass, burning up ants. You felt like a child with a magnifying glass, burning up ants. In fact, the metaphor was, or I should say the simile, was remarkably accurate. Among the substances that Israel used in Gaza was white phosphorus. Now, in its previous wars as well, it had used the white phosphorus. I remember when I first got involved in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, it was using the white phosphorus. But I never looked into the details. It had a sinister-sounding name, white phosphorus. But I never looked past that. This time I did. White phosphorus, it reaches a temperature, do you use Fahrenheit or centigrade in Canada? It reaches a temperature of 816 degrees centigrade. 816 degrees centigrade. As Oprah would say, try wrapping your mind around that. But what did Israel do with the white phosphorus? Human Rights Watch put out a report entitled Rain of Fire. And this is what they said. Israel repeatedly exploded white phosphorus munitions in the air over populated areas. It exploded white phosphorus over a school. a marketplace